Hey guys, tonight we are diving headfirst into the bubbling, smoking, and often misunderstood world of the alchemists. We're going to follow their obsessive quest for a substance that could cure all disease, grant eternal life, and turn lead into pure, gleaming gold. Picture it, a shadowy laboratory lit by the flickering dance of a furnace flame. Strange glass vessels, twisted into shapes that defy easy description, bubble away on the heat. The air is thick with the scent of sulfur, strange herbs, and something metallic, something ancient. And in the center of it all is a lone figure, poring over a cryptic manuscript, their face illuminated by the glow of their work, convinced they are just one step away from conquering death itself. We are going to chase that obsession tonight, and together we'll try to brew the elixir of life. Spoiler alert, you probably won't survive this, but hey, it's the thought that counts. So before you get comfortable, take a moment to like the video and subscribe, but only if you genuinely enjoy what I do here. I always love to see how far these stories travel, so feel free to post your location and what time it is where you are. Now dim the lights, maybe turn on a fan for that soft background hum, and let's ease into tonight's journey together. Your journey doesn't begin in a drafty European castle or a cluttered Renaissance workshop. Not yet. To find the true headwaters of this strange and powerful river, you have to travel much farther back, letting the centuries peel away like layers of papyrus. You find yourself standing on the banks of a river so vast, so life-giving, that an entire civilization worships it as a god. This is the Nile. The sun is a heavy, golden weight on your shoulders, and the air smells of rich, wet earth, blooming lotus, and the distant promise of desert sand. The people who live here call their home Kemet, the Black Land. It's not a sinister name. It's a practical one, a name of gratitude. It refers to the strip of dark, incredibly fertile silt the Nile leaves behind each year after its flood. This black soil is the source of all life, all wealth, all stability. It's the engine of Egypt. And it's from this concept, this Kenia, or art of the Black Land, that we get our word, alchemy. Before it was about turning lead to gold, it was about understanding the transformations happening right here in the mud. The cycle of flood and harvest, of life springing from decay, of barren sand ordering breathtaking abundance. This was the first great chemical reaction, and you're standing right in the middle of it. You leave the riverbank and walk toward the cool, imposing shadow of a temple complex. The real work, the secret work, happens here. Not in public view, but in the temple workshops and the houses of life attached to them. Here, the line between priest and craftsman is beautifully, purposefully blurred. You see a man with the shaved head of a priest, carefully grinding malachite into a fine green powder. Is he an artist making paint, a cosmetician making eyeshadow, or a priest preparing a sacred offering to Osiris? The answer is yes. To the ancient Egyptian mind, these were not separate jobs. You watch as they work. Their practical skills are simply staggering. They are masters of what we would now call applied chemistry. They can smelt and alloy metals copper, and tin to make bronze, gold and silver to make electrum. They are creating the world's first synthetic pigment, a stunning, vibrant blue made by heating sand, copper, and natron. We call it Egyptian blue today, and for thousands of years, the exact recipe was a closely guarded secret, a sacred formula owned by the temple. They are brewing beer and baking bread, fermenting wine, and decanting priceless perfumes from flowers, resins, and oils. This isn't just industry. It's a form of worship. Making a perfect blue is to capture the color of the heavens. Fashioning a flawless gold amulet is to imbue a mortal object with the eternal, incorruptible flesh of the gods. The gods, after all, definitely need their bling. In a quieter corner, you see others consulting a long scroll. This could be something like the Ebers Papyrus, a real medical text from around 1550 BC, It contains hundreds of remedies and magical incantations. You see a recipe for a stomach ailment next to a spell to ward off a demon. A prescription for an eye infection sits beside a formula for, well, sunscreen made from crocodile dung. Okay, maybe not all their ideas were gold. But the point is, for them, the physical and the metaphysical were one and the same. A plant's healing properties were an expression of its divine essence. A potion wasn't just a mixture of ingredients. It was an appeal to the cosmic forces that governed life and health. Historians still argue whether the primary motivation for these proto-alchemists was practical need or spiritual duty. When a priest-metallurgist heated a dull, gray ore and watched it bleed a shining stream of pure copper, was he just thinking about making tools and statues? Or did he see a profound mystery unfolding apace? Earthbound substance being purified, resurrected into a higher, more noble state? This idea of purification, of elevation, of raising the imperfect to a state of perfection, is the seed that will grow into the great tree of alchemy. The divine patron of this secret knowledge is the ibis-headed god Thoth. He is the scribe of the gods, the keeper of sacred texts, the master of magic, mathematics, and writing. It is Thoth who understands the hidden grammar of the universe. The Greeks who arrive here much later will look at Thoth and see their own god, Hermes. They will merge the two, creating a new figure of immense power, Hermes Trismegistus, or Hermes the Thrice Great. He will become the legendary founder of alchemy, the supposed author of its foundational texts. But right now, he is still Thoth, and his wisdom is Egyptian wisdom. It's a wisdom rooted in the black earth, in the transformative power of the sun and the furnace, and in the belief that the entire cosmos, from the stars above to the metals below, is a single living, breathing entity shot through with divine meaning. The secret to changing the world, they believe, is simply to learn its hidden language. And as you stand in the cool, incense-scented air of the temple, you can feel the first few words of that language beginning to form around you. The air in the temple begins to change. A new energy, sharp and inquisitive, blows in from across the great sea. It's the energy of a different kind of mind, one less concerned with ancient, unchanging ritual and more interested in asking a simple, profound, and endlessly annoying question. Why? The Greeks have arrived, first as traders, then as mercenaries, and finally as conquerors with Alexander the Great at their head. And where the Egyptian mind saw a divine mystery in the transformation of copper ore, the Greek mind sees a puzzle to be solved, a process to be defined and categorized. Of course they did. You can't let a perfectly good mystery lie around without poking it with a stick and trying to write a unified theory about it. You are swept along in this tide of change, down from the old temples of the Nile to a new city rising on the coast. Alexandria, the salt spray of the Mediterranean, mists your face, a stark contrast to the dry desert air you've grown used to. Your first stop is the Mausoleum, the shrine of the Muses. It's less a museum and more the world's first state-funded research institute, and attached to it is the legendary Great Library. Here, the practical, secret-hoarding craft of the Egyptian temples collides head-on with Greek philosophy. The Egyptian priests bring their millennia of hands-on experience, their techne. They know the recipes. They know what happens when you heat malachite with charcoal. They know how to create that stunning blue pigment. They know how to work gold and mimic its appearance with cheaper alloys. The city is a marvel, a testament to ambition. A colossal lighthouse, the Pharaohs, pierces the sky, its beam a reassuring guide for ships carrying not just grain and pottery, but scrolls and ideas. You walk through wide, planned streets, a crossroads of the world. You hear Greek spoken by philosophers in flowing robes, Aramaic by traders from the East, the old Egyptian tongue from the laborers and priests, and Hebrew from the scholars poring over texts in their own quarter. This is the new laboratory. Not a single room, but an entire city, buzzing with intellectual fusion. But the Greeks bring their logos, their rational framework. They bring Aristotle. While Aristotle himself was long gone by the time Alexandria hit its peak, his ideas formed the bedrock of their science. You slip into a lecture hall where a philosopher is explaining his model of the universe. He holds up his hands, explaining that all matter, everything you see, touch, and are, is composed of 4 simple elements: earth, water, air, and fire. But that's not the revolutionary part. The true magic lies in his next idea, that these elements themselves are not fundamental. They are expressions of a single, universal, shapeless stuff he calls prima materia, or prime matter. It's like cosmic Play-Doh. This prime matter, he explains, is acted upon by 4 qualities: hot, cold, wet, and dry. Combine hot and dry, and you get fire. Hot and wet gives you air. Cold and wet creates water. And cold and dry makes earth. Suddenly, the lights go on for the Egyptian craftsmen in the room. Their secret arts are no longer just divine mysteries. They have a theoretical explanation. When they smelt ore, they are not just coaxing out the copper. They are using fire to strip away the earthy qualities and reveal the metallic substance within. The idea of transmutation is no longer a vague spiritual hope. It's a logical conclusion. If lead and gold are both made of the same prima materia, just with a different balance of elemental qualities, then changing one into the other shouldn't be impossible. It should just be a matter of finding the right process, a way to wash, cook, and purify the base metal, adjusting its qualities until it achieves the perfect, incorruptible balance of gold. This is the grand synthesis. The practical, hands-on chemistry of Egypt provides the how, and Greek philosophy provides the why. In the workshops of Alexandria, you see this new science being born. You see an artisan who would have once been called a priest now being called a philosopher. You see texts being written that combine practical recipes for dyeing cloth or alloying metals with complex, astrological, and philosophical symbolism. In one of these workshops, you hear tell of a figure named Maria the Jewess, sometimes called Mary the Prophetess. She is one of the earliest alchemists whose name has survived, a revered, almost legendary founder. She is credited with inventing several key pieces of alchemical apparatus. You see one of them bubbling away in a corner, a contraption that allows for gentle, even heating. It's a pot set within a larger pot of boiling water. They call it the keratokis, an instrument for heating substances and collecting vapors. But we know it today by a different name, one derived from hers, the bain-marie or Mary's bath. That's right, the same double boiler method used in modern kitchens to melt chocolate without scorching. It was invented by an ancient alchemist, likely for purposes far more ambitious than making fondue. The knowledge created here is considered powerful and dangerous. It's often written in code, veiled in allegory. This is where the figure of Hermes Trismegistus, the thrice great, truly comes into his own as the patron of this new hermetic art. Texts attributed to him, like the famous Emerald Tablet, become the foundational documents of alchemy. They are deliberately cryptic, speaking of things as above, so below, linking the processes in the alchemist's flask to the movements of the planets and the spiritual state of the alchemists themselves. Historians still argue whether the writings of figures like Zosimos of Panopolis, another key Alexandrian alchemist, were practical lab manuals disguised in mystical language or purely spiritual allegories from the very beginning. Was the goal really to make physical gold, or was lead a metaphor for the ignorant human soul, and gold a symbol of enlightenment? In Alexandria, the answer seems to be a resounding and beautifully complicated both. The physical and the spiritual were 2 sides of the same golden coin they were all so desperately trying to mint. The vibrant energy of Alexandria begins to fade. The great library flickers and goes out, and the Roman world that supported it crumbles. The center of intellectual gravity shifts. You now find yourself traveling east, across the sun-scorched landscapes of Syria and Persia. The knowledge of the Greeks and Egyptians, saved on fragile scrolls, is on a journey of its own, carried by Nestorian Christians and other refugees fleeing persecution. They are the librarians of a fallen world, and their precious cargo finds a new, eager home. You arrive in a city that is the new center of the world, Baghdad. In the 8th and 9th centuries, this circular city is the dazzling capital of the Abbasid Caliphate, a place of immense wealth, power, and an insatiable intellectual curiosity. You walk through its bustling souk, the air alive with the scent of spices, perfumes, and roasting coffee. The Abbasid caliphs, rulers like Harun al-Rashid and his son al-Mun, are not just conquerors. They are patrons of a grand intellectual project. They want to gather all the knowledge of the known world, from the Greeks, the Persians, the Indians, and translate it into Arabic. This mission is institutionalized in a place that echoes Alexandria's greatness, the Beit al-Hikmah, or the House of Wisdom. It is a library, a translation center, and a research institute all in one. You see scholars of every faith and background, Muslim, Christian, Jewish, working side by side. They are translating Aristotle's philosophy, Euclid's geometry, Ptolemy's astronomy, and Galen's medicine. And tucked within this avalanche of text, they are also translating the Hermetic and alchemical works from Alexandria. Here, in the orderly, scholarly environment of Baghdad, alchemy undergoes its next great transformation. It is systematized. It is studied not just as a mystical art, but as a science. The Arabic word for it is al-chemy. Our word alchemy is a direct borrowing. And the greatest name associated with this new, more rigorous alchemy is Abu Musa Jabir ibn Hayyan, known in the West as Geber. Though the historical Jabir is a shadowy figure, and hundreds of texts were likely attributed to him by a later school of writers, the body of work under his name is monumental. You slip into a workshop where his principles are being put into practice. The mystical vagueness of Alexandria is giving way to a new clarity. The Jabirian alchemists are obsessed with experimentation and classification. They believe that true knowledge can only be gained through practical work, or tajriba. The first essential in chemistry, a text attributed to Jabir insists, is that you should perform practical work and conduct experiments. For he who performs not practical work nor makes experiments will never attain to the least degree of mastery. This is a profound shift. It's a step away from pure philosophical speculation and a step toward the modern scientific method. You watch them at work. They are developing new techniques and equipment. They perfect the process of distillation, using an elegant glass, still called an alembic, another word we get from Arabic, al-anki. With it they can separate liquids and create powerful substances like distilled vinegar and even alcohol, which they call alcohol. Though its intoxicating properties were well known, its pure distillation was a major chemical achievement. They discover and describe strong acids like nitric and sulfuric acid, substances so powerful they are called waters of parting because they can dissolve metals, even gold, when mixed as aqua regia. This is a huge leap forward. The ancient world had nothing like these powerful reagents. The theory gets an upgrade too. Building on Aristotle's 4 elements, the Jabirian system introduces the sulfur-mercury theory of metals. The idea is that all metals are formed deep within the earth from the combination of 2 fundamental principles: sulfur, which embodies the principle of combustibility and oiliness, and mercury, which represents the principle of fusibility and metallic luster. A perfect balance of a very pure sulfur and mercury produces gold. An imbalance or an impurity in one or both of the principles results in silver, lead, copper, or iron. This theory will dominate alchemical thinking for the next 1,000 years. It makes the goal crystal clear. To change lead into gold, you just need to find a way to adjust its internal ratio of sulfur and Mercury. Easy, right? Just a bit of cosmic rebalancing. Here you find another fascinating tidbit that sits at the edge of science and folklore. The Islamic alchemists were also fascinated by the idea of takwin, the creation of artificial life in the laboratory. The Jabirian corpus contains strange and esoteric passages that hint at recipes for creating snakes, scorpions, and even a miniature, homunculus-like human. Historians still argue whether these were meant to be taken literally, as evidence of a golem-like ambition, or if they were, like so many alchemical texts, elaborate allegories for spiritual or chemical processes. This new, improved alchemy, with its rigorous methods, powerful new chemicals, and a clear theoretical framework, is a powerful body of knowledge. It is practical. Alchemists advise on mining, metalworking, glassmaking, and pharmacology. They are the leading chemists of their day. They are not just dreamers hunting for gold. They are the scientists and technicians of the Islamic Golden Age. The great work, the quest for the Philosopher's Stone, is still the ultimate prize. But along the way, they are laying the foundations of real, empirical chemistry. The secrets that you saw born in the black soil of Egypt and fused with Greek philosophy in Alexandria have now been catalogued, tested, and written down with a new clarity and purpose here in Baghdad. Their next journey will take them west, back across the sea, where they will arrive in a Europe just beginning to awaken from its own dark age. The vibrant intellectual energy of Baghdad and the wider Islamic world begins to radiate outwards. While the great caliphates eventually fracture and decline, the knowledge they curated is now a preserved treasure, locked away in Arabic manuscripts. Your journey now turns westward, following the path of these precious texts as they make their way into a very different world, the Christian lands of medieval Europe. The mood is different here. The sun seems less certain. The cities are more compact, huddled for warmth and safety behind thick stone walls. The intellectual landscape is dominated not by bustling, multicultural research institutes, but by the quiet cloisters of monasteries and the nascent, religiously grounded universities. You find yourself in 12th century Spain, in the city of Toledo. For centuries, this has been a frontier zone, a place where Christian, Muslim, and Jewish cultures have lived side by side, sometimes in peace, often in conflict. After its reconquest by Christian forces, Toledo becomes a magnet for a new kind of scholar, the translator. It's like a reverse house of wisdom. Here, European scholars, hungry for the lost knowledge of the ancients, are discovering the vast intellectual wealth of the Arabic-speaking world. You join a small group of these men, huddled in a dimly lit room that smells of old parchment, oil lamps, and damp wool. The work is slow and painstaking. A Jewish scholar, fluent in Arabic, reads from an original manuscript, perhaps a work by Jabir, Ibn Hayyan, or al-Razi. He translates it aloud into a local Romance dialect. Then, a Christian scholar, often a monk, listens and writes it down in Latin, the universal language of learning in Christendom. It's an intellectual bucket brigade, passing knowledge from one civilization to another. You see them struggle. How do you translate al-Ankh? They settle on the Latin alembigus. How do you explain the subtle concepts of the sulfur-mercury theory to a mind unfamiliar with them? It's a colossal undertaking. One of the most important translators you encounter is an Englishman named Robert of Chester. In 1144, he completes the first translation of a major Arabic alchemical text into Latin, a work he calls the Liber de Composition Alchemia, or Book on the Composition of Alchemy. In his introduction, Robert writes with a palpable sense of excitement, presenting this secret philosophy to the Latin world for the first time. He has opened the floodgate. Soon, a torrent of alchemical knowledge, including the works attributed to Geber and the medical alchemy of Rhazes, pours into Europe. This new knowledge spreads like wildfire. It arrives in a Europe that is intellectually fertile ground. The scholastic philosophers in the new universities, like Paris and Oxford, are already deeply engaged with the recently rediscovered works of Aristotle. Alchemy, with its Aristotelian roots and its clear systematic framework from the Islamic world, seems to fit perfectly. It feels like a missing piece of the puzzle, a science that promises not just to understand the world, but to change it. You see monks in their scriptoriums, far from the battlefields and bustling cities, hunched over these new texts, meticulously copying the strange diagrams and cryptic recipes. A mainstream historical fact is that one of the most famous of these early adopters was Albertus Magnus, a Dominican friar and teacher of Thomas Aquinas. He was a brilliant naturalist and philosopher who studied and wrote about the new science of alchemy, carefully testing its claims and documenting metallic properties. The European mind, however, adds its own unique flavor to the mix. The quest for gold and immortality is fused deeply with Christian allegory. The transmutation of lead into gold becomes a powerful metaphor for the purification of the human soul, for the resurrection of Christ, and for the redemption of humanity from its fallen state. The alchemist's furnace, the Athenor, is seen as a kind of mechanical womb, echoing the womb of the Virgin Mary, where an imperfect substance is miraculously transformed into something perfect. The philosopher's stone itself is often referred to as the Son of Philosophy, an echo of the Son of God. This layering of Christian symbolism on top of the Greco-Egyptian and Islamic foundations creates a uniquely European alchemy, one that is both a practical science and a deeply spiritual meditative practice. You also encounter a stranger, more fringe belief that takes hold in the popular imagination, the idea of the reed man or reed tincture. While the philosopher's stone was said to be a dense, heavy powder, some alchemical traditions spoke of it becoming a powerful red liquid or tincture in its final stages. A single drop of this substance was said to be capable of transmuting vast quantities of base metal. This red man became a kind of alchemical holy grail, a symbol of the ultimate transformative power, sometimes depicted in manuscripts as a red-crowned king emerging from the fire. It was the stuff of legend, the ultimate get-rich-quick scheme, whispered about in taverns and royal courts alike. Of course, this influx of secret, powerful knowledge also breeds suspicion. The Church has a complicated relationship with alchemy. Is it a legitimate natural philosophy, a way of understanding God's creation? Or is it a dangerous form of magic, an attempt to usurp God's creative power? Historians still argue whether the various papal bulls issued in the 13th and 14th centuries, such as John the 22nd Spondent Quas non exhibent, were outright condemnations of all alchemy, or simply laws against fraudulent counterfeiters who were debasing the currency. The line was thin. An alchemist working quietly in a monastery under the patronage of an abbot might be seen as a pious investigator of divine secrets. An independent practitioner working in a city basement could easily be accused of sorcery, heresy, and consorting with demons. It's a dangerous game. The knowledge you saw smuggled into this world is now a source of both incredible hope and terrible peril. It promises the secrets of eternal life, but a misstep could lead you straight to the Inquisitor's door. The knowledge is now firmly rooted in European soil, and it's beginning to bear strange and wonderful fruit. The initial thrill of translation is over, and now the real work, or, as they call it, the great work, magnum opus, begins in earnest. You are no longer just a passive observer of texts being copied. You are now in the thick of the action, breathing the acrid smoke of 1,000 laboratories, where the ultimate prize is being pursued with a single-minded, almost fanatical devotion. The goal has become an obsession that grips everyone from monks and scholars to knights and kings. That goal is the philosopher's stone. What is this mysterious substance? You hear it described in 100 different ways, a testament to the fact that nobody has actually seen it. Some call it a heavy powder, the color of saffron or crushed ruby. Others describe it as a waxy, reddish substance or a stone that is not a stone. In some texts, it's a divine glass. In others, a tincture or elixir. But its properties, all agree, are miraculous. Its primary power is transmutation. A tiny grain of the stone, wrapped in wax and thrown into a crucible of molten lead, would supposedly trigger a chain reaction, instantly converting the entire mass into pure, natural gold, not a cheap imitation, but gold more perfect than any. Mined from the earth. Just think about the economics of that for a second. It's the ultimate disruption, but its power over metals is merely a pale reflection of its second, far more desirable ability, its effect on the human body. When prepared as a liquid, often called the elixir of life, it was said to be the universal panacea. A single dose could cure any disease, from a simple cold to the most virulent plague. It would restore youth, vigor, and vitality. And if taken periodically, it would halt the aging process entirely, granting the user a form of functional immortality. You wouldn't be immune to, say, a sword through the chest, but you would be immune to the slow decay of time. You could live for centuries, even millennia, a perfected human being. It's an irresistible promise. It's the answer to the two greatest fears that haunt humanity, poverty and death. No wonder they were obsessed. You find yourself in the workshop of a dedicated alchemist. The process he is following is impossibly long and arduous. The great work is not a weekend project. Texts speak of it taking months, years, even a lifetime of patient, continuous labor. The alchemist must be as pure as the materials he works with. He must be patient, pious, and free from greed, a detail that a lot of them seem to have conveniently overlooked. The work is often divided into stages, symbolized by colors. It begins with the nigredo, the blackening. This is a stage of putrefaction, and decay, where the initial ingredients are broken down in the furnace, reduced to a uniform black sludge. This represents death, the dissolution of the old corrupt form. Then, after a long period of gentle cooking in the sealed vessel, the albedo, or the whitening, appears. A beautiful, shining white substance emerges from the blackness. This is a stage of purification, washing, and resurrection. The material has been cleansed of its impurities. Following this comes the citronitis, a yellowing, which many alchemists saw as a false dawn, a precursor to the final, true stage. Finally, if the alchemist has done everything correctly, if the stars are aligned, and if God wills it, the rubedo, the reddening, is achieved. The white substance transforms into the miraculous red powder, the philosopher's stone. The search for the correct starting material, the prima materia, was the greatest secret of all. What was it? Some argued it was a common substance, something overlooked by the vulgar, like dew, urine, or even dirt. Others insisted it was a specific metal or mineral, like antimony or mercury. A famous mainstream historical alchemist, Nicholas Flamel, who lived in 14th century Paris, supposedly succeeded in the great work. The story goes that he acquired a mysterious ancient book filled with cryptic diagrams, and after years of work, he and his wife Perenelle successfully created the stone, made a vast fortune by transmuting mercury into gold, and used their wealth for philanthropy, funding hospitals and churches throughout Paris before arranging their own quiet disappearance into immortality. It's a great story, but modern historians have found zero evidence that Flamel was ever an alchemist. He was simply a successful and shrewd property owner. The legend was attached to him long after his death, likely as a way to give hope and a compelling narrative to other seekers. One of the quirkiest and most enduring fringe candidates for the prima materia was human waste. Yes, you heard that right. Some alchemical schools, particularly one known as the Dirty Path, believed that the seed of life, and therefore the seed of metallic life, must be contained in the most humble and rejected of substances. This led to some truly stomach-churning experiments. The 17th century alchemist Hennig Brand, for instance, would later discover phosphorus by boiling down vast quantities of urine in his search for the stone. So, while it sounds bizarre, the willingness to look for treasure in the most unlikely of places was a core alchemical trait. Historians still argue whether the complex, multi-stage process of the great work was ever a real chemical formula, or if it was entirely an allegory for a psychospiritual journey. Was the Negredo a chemical process of decay, or was it a description of a dark night of the soul, a period of intense depression and self-doubt the alchemist had to overcome? Was the rubedo a physical red powder, or a symbol of achieving divine union and enlightenment? The texts themselves are so deliberately obscure that they can support either interpretation. For many alchemists, it was likely both. They believed the purification of the metals in their flasks and the purification of their own souls were reflections of each other, part of one single sacred interconnected process. As you watch the alchemist stare into the glowing heart of his furnace, his face a mask of hope and exhaustion, you realize he isn't just trying to make gold. He's trying to remake himself, to perfect his own flawed nature, chasing an immortality that was as much spiritual as it was physical. The air in the alchemist's laboratory, thick with the sulphurous smoke of the great work, is about to be cleared by a hurricane of a man. The singular focus on the philosopher's stone, on the endless cyclical process of chasing gold, is about to be challenged by a figure so brilliant, so arrogant, and so revolutionary that he would change the course of alchemy forever. You are about to meet Theophrastus von Hohenheim, but you will know him by the name he chose for himself, Paracelsus. The name itself is a boast. It means equal to or greater than Celsus, referring to a famous Roman encyclopedist on medicine. This was not a man who suffered from a lack of self-esteem. You find yourself in the early 16th century, a time of massive upheaval. The Renaissance is in full swing. The Reformation is tearing Christendom apart, and the printing press is spreading new and radical ideas at an unprecedented rate. Paracelsus is a man perfectly suited to this chaotic age. He was a physician, a botanist, an astrologer, and a fiercely opinionated alchemist. You see him on the road, a perpetual wanderer. Unlike the cloistered scholars or courtly alchemists, Paracelsus learned his trade not just from books, but from miners, barbers, executioners, and village healers. He believed that knowledge was found in the world, not just in ancient texts. His central world-changing idea is a radical reimagining of alchemy's purpose. You hear him railing against the traditional alchemists, the gold cookers, as he calls them. The purpose of alchemy is not to make gold, he thunders to a crowd of stunned students, but to prepare medicines. This is a bombshell. He argues that the human body is a microcosm, a miniature version of the universe, the macrocosm. Just as the earth contains metals and minerals, so too does the human body. Therefore, disease is a result of an imbalance in the body's internal chemistry. A healthy body is a body in alchemical balance. To restore this balance, Paracelsus proposes a new kind of medicine. He dismisses the traditional herbal remedies of Galen, which had dominated Western medicine for over 1,000 years, as little more than soup. Instead, he advocates for the use of potent, chemically prepared medicines derived from metals and minerals. This is the birth of iatrochemistry, or chemical medicine. He builds upon the old sulfur-mercury theory of the Arabs, adding a third principle, salt, which represents the principle of body, stability, and incombustibility. Together, the trier prima sulfur, mercury, and salt form the basis of all things, including the human body. Sickness, he taught, was when one of these three principles fell out of balance. You follow him into his makeshift laboratory. He is not trying to transmute lead into gold. He is using alchemical techniques: distillation, calcination, purification to detoxify poisonous metallic substances and turn them into powerful cures. He creates a tincture of antimony to induce purging. He uses compounds of mercury to treat syphilis, a horrifying disease ravaging Europe at the time. He creates laudanum, an alcoholic tincture of opium, which would become one of the most effective and widely used painkillers for centuries. Remember the old crocodile dung sunscreen from Egypt? We've come a long way. His most famous principle is the one that forms the bedrock of modern toxicology and pharmacology. All things are poison, and nothing is without poison, he declares. The dosage alone makes it so a thing is not a poison. This is a revolutionary insight. The same arsenic that can kill can, in a minuscule, purified dose, potentially be a medicine. The same mercury that drives hatters mad can, when properly prepared, fight disease. This concept of the dose-response relationship is a cornerstone of medicine to this day. You wouldn't have modern pharmaceuticals without this fundamental Paracelsian idea. Of course, his methods were incredibly dangerous. He was, in effect, prescribing heavy metals. His critics, and there were many, accused him of being a reckless poisoner. They called him a charlatan, a drunkard, and a heretic, in a famously defiant gesture while teaching at the University of Basel. He publicly burned the works of Avicenna and Galen, the titans of classical medicine, declaring that his own shoelaces knew more than they did. It was a brilliant piece of academic theater, but it won him few friends. He was chased out of Basel after less than a year. You also discover a quirkier side to his vast and often contradictory body of work. Paracelsus was deeply immersed in the folk magic and occult philosophy of his time. He wrote extensively about gnomes, earth elementals, undines, water elementals, sylphs, air elementals, and salamanders, fire elementals. He believed these beings were real, living on a plane, invisible to most humans, and that understanding them was part of understanding the total cosmos. This wasn't a fringe belief for him. It was integral to his view of a living, breathing, ensouled world where the spiritual and physical were inextricably linked. Historians still argue whether Paracelsus was the last of the great medieval alchemists, or the first of the modern chemical physicians. Was he a magician clinging to an old worldview, or a scientific visionary paving the way for the future? The truth is, he was both. He was a transitional figure, a man with one foot in the mystical world of alchemy and the other stepping firmly into the empirical world of scientific medicine. He took alchemy, which had been aimed at the heavens in its quest for immortality, and forced it to look at the suffering, sickness, and decay of the human body right here on earth. He didn't abandon the quest for the elixir of life. He just broke it down into 1,000 smaller, more specific elixirs, creating a pharmacy of potent, and often perilous, new weapons in the fight against disease. The great work was no longer just about perfecting metals. It was now about perfecting human health. With Paracelsus having thrown open the doors of the laboratory to the world of medicine, alchemy's influence spreads far beyond the dusty workshops of solitary dreamers. It now finds a new, powerful, and often perilous home, the royal court. The promise of alchemy, even after the Paracelsian shift, remained twofold and irresistible to any monarch worth their salt. First, the old promise, the ability to create gold, could solve any treasury crisis, fund any army, and build any palace. Second, the new promise, iatrochemistry and the elixir of life could cure the royal family of illness, secure the succession by producing healthy heirs, and perhaps even grant the monarch an unnaturally long reign. It was the ultimate power fantasy, and rulers across Europe were desperate to hire their own personal magus. You find yourself navigating the treacherous, whispering corridors of Elizabethan England. The political climate is tense, fraught with intrigue, assassination plots, and the constant threat of war with Spain. In this high-stakes environment, Queen Elizabeth I, a famously pragmatic and intelligent ruler, relies on a man who is the epitome of the Renaissance court alchemist. His name is John Dee. You see him first in his home at Mortlake, just outside London. It is one of the most magnificent private libraries in all of England, larger than Oxford's or Cambridge's at the time. Dee is a man of staggering intellect, a brilliant mathematician, a skilled navigator who helped plan England's voyages of discovery, a cryptographer, an astrologer, and a deeply committed alchemist. He is not a fraud or a gold cooker, but a serious philosopher who believes that alchemy, astrology, and mathematics are all keys to a single, unified understanding of God's divine creation. When he speaks, the Queen listens. He advises her on the most auspicious date for her coronation based on his astrological calculations, a mainstream historical fact that shows how deeply these occult sciences were embedded in the fabric of power. Dee's life embodies the dual nature of the court alchemist. On the one hand, he is a practical scientist. You see him consulting with sailors, drawing maps, and working on complex mathematical problems. He is a key proponent of English expansionism and is credited with coining the term British Empire. His knowledge is a strategic asset to the state. On the other hand, in the privacy of his inner sanctum, he pursues a far stranger and more esoteric path. He becomes convinced that he can no longer learn what he needs from books alone. He needs to speak directly with a higher intelligence. This is where you meet his associate, a man named Edward Kelly. Kelly is a far more dubious character, a scryer or crystal gazer who claims to have the ability to communicate with angels. In a darkened room, you watch their strange sessions unfold. Dee poses questions about the nature of the universe, the secrets of creation, and of course, the formula for the philosopher's stone. Kelly stares into a polished obsidian mirror, or a crystal show stone, and begins to relay the answers he receives from spiritual beings. He describes a complex Enochian language of the angels, its alphabet and grammar dictated to him syllable by syllable. For Dee, this is not magic in a demonic sense. It is Holy Communion, a divine science. He is receiving a direct revelation. Bypassing the cryptic texts of the past, this strange partnership eventually takes them on a tour of the royal courts of Europe. They are invited by kings and emperors who have heard of their supposed powers. You travel with them to the court of the Holy Roman Emperor, Rudolph II, in Prague. Rudolph's court is the absolute epicenter of late Renaissance occultism. He is the ultimate alchemical patron, gathering astronomers like Tycho Brahe and Johannes Kepler, alongside a host of alchemists, magicians, and artists. His castle complex, the Radschin, is a labyrinth of laboratories, observatories, and workshops. The emperor, a melancholic and reclusive man, poured a fortune into the great work, hoping it would solve his political and personal troubles. Here, in the feverish atmosphere of Prague, you witness a quirky and telling tidbit of alchemical lore. In action, the alchemical trial. A nobleman or king would often demand that a visiting alchemist prove their worth. They would be given a laboratory, starting materials, and a deadline. Success meant immense reward and a coveted court position. Failure, however, could mean being exposed as a fraud, imprisoned for debt, or even executed. One German ruler famously kept a special gallows plated with gold, specifically for hanging alchemists who failed to deliver on their promises. It was a grim joke. They came seeking gold, and they would get it, one way or another. Dee and Kelly's partnership eventually dissolves under the pressure and paranoia of this world. Kelly claims the angels have instructed them to share everything, including their wives, which Dee, a devoutly religious man, finds abhorrent. They part ways, their grand project unfinished. Dee returns to England, his reputation tarnished, and dies in relative poverty. Kelly, who claimed to have discovered the red tincture, is imprisoned by Emperor Rudolph for failing to produce a sufficient quantity of gold, and dies trying to escape. Historians still argue whether John Dee was a brilliant proto-scientist duped by a cunning charlatan in Kelly, or if he was a genuine mystic whose intellectual ambition simply took him beyond the accepted boundaries of his time. Was he a master of espionage using his occult pursuits as a cover for intelligence gathering? Or was he truly seeking contact with angels? His story is a powerful cautionary tale. The alchemist at court walked a razor's edge. The favor of a prince was a source of immense funding and protection, but it came at a price. The line between being the queen's most trusted advisor and being a prisoner in the emperor's dungeon was perilously thin, and was often measured in the gleaming, elusive weight of promised gold. For every brilliant, sincere seeker like John Dee, and for every revolutionary thinker like Paracelsus, there were a dozen con artists. The allure of alchemy, with its promise of infinite wealth and eternal life, created the perfect hunting ground for some of history's most creative and audacious frauds. The very secrecy and complexity that alchemists used to protect their sacred knowledge also provided the perfect cover for charlatans to prey on the greedy and the desperate. You now move from the high-stakes world of the royal court to the grimy back alleys and noble estates where the art of the deal often trumped the art of alchemy. You find yourself in a lavishly appointed room, the private study of a wealthy merchant or a land-poor baron. He's a man with more ambition than sense, and he's listening with rapt attention to a visitor with a flair for the dramatic. The visitor is a professor of alchemy, dressed in slightly too ostentatious robes, his speech peppered with just enough arcane jargon to sound impressive, but not enough to be comprehensible. He speaks of the prima materia, of the conjunction of the Red King and the White Queen, and of his own imminent success in the great work. He just needs a little more funding, a patron with the vision to support the final, crucial stages. He is, of course, a complete and utter fraud. You get to be a fly on the wall, watching the classic tricks of the trade. The most common demonstration was a small-scale, seemingly successful transmutation. The charlatan would produce a crucible and ask for a piece of lead from the patron's own stock to ensure there was no trickery. He would melt it down and add a pinch of a mysterious white powder. After a bit of stirring and some impressive incantations, he would pour out the contents. Amidst the slag and dross, there it would be, a small gleaming bead of pure silver. How is it done? You get to see the secret. The professor might use a crucible with a false bottom containing silver powder, sealed with wax that would melt away in the heat. A more common method was the hollow stirring rod. The rod would be filled with gold or silver dust and plugged at the end with wax. As the charlatan stirred the molten lead, the wax would melt, releasing the precious metal into the mixture. When cooled, the small amount of real gold or silver would be discovered, proof of the alchemist's power. A con man would then explain that this was just a projection, a tiny demonstration, and with a proper laboratory and more funding, he could scale this up to produce pounds of the stuff. It was an investment opportunity you couldn't refuse. You witness another, even more theatrical scam. A charlatan claims his tincture can grow gold. He takes a gold coin from his patron, files off a few grains, and places them in a crucible with mercury and other bubbling concoctions. After a week of fermentation, he reveals a new, slightly larger lump of gold. The trick? He had palmed the original coin and swapped in a pre-prepared, slightly heavier piece of gold he brought with him. It was simple sleight of hand, dressed up in the language of cosmic science. One of the most famous and well-documented cases of alchemical fraud involved a figure known as the Gold Rosicrucian. In the 1780s, a secret society calling itself the Order of the Golden and Rosy Cross swept through Germany, convincing many, including the Prussian King Frederick William II, that they held the secrets to alchemy. A key figure was a man named Johann Rudolf von Bischofwerder, who, along with his partner Johann Christoph von Wöllner, used faked transmutations and seances to gain immense influence at court. They used their power to enact conservative religious and political reforms, showing how alchemical fraud could be a tool for something far more ambitious than mere financial gain. It could be a lever for political power, but sometimes the line between fraud and true belief was wonderfully, comically blurry. You come across the quirky story of James Price, an English chemist and a respected member of the Royal Society. In 1782, Price announced to the world that he had successfully created a powder that could transmute mercury into silver and gold. He held public demonstrations in his laboratory in Guildford, inviting skeptics and nobles alike. And by all accounts, his experiments worked. He produced small but verifiable amounts of precious metals, baffling his esteemed colleagues. The king himself took an interest. The Royal Society, however, was deeply skeptical. They demanded he repeat his experiments in front of a committee of his peers, and that he reveal his process. Price prevaricated. He claimed his initial stock of the miraculous powder was exhausted, and that making more was expensive and damaging to his health. The pressure mounted. He was a respected scientist, and his reputation was on the line. Finally, in 1783, he agreed to a final demonstration. The leading members of the Royal Society gathered in his lab. Price greeted them, then stepped into an adjoining room for a moment. A moment later, the assembled scientists heard a thud. They rushed in to find him dead on the floor. He had committed suicide by drinking prussic acid, a poison he had distilled himself. Historians still argue about James Price's motivations. Was he a deliberate fraud from the start, who saw no way out when his bluff was called? Or was he a sincere but self-deluded man, who had perhaps stumbled upon a strange chemical fluke in his early experiments that he couldn't replicate, and chose death over the humiliation of admitting he was wrong? His story is a tragedy, a perfect illustration of how the immense pressure to succeed in alchemy could lead a man to ruin, whether he was a con artist or not. As you watch these dramas of deception and self-deception unfold, you see how the very human desire for a shortcut, for a miracle, made people vulnerable. The dream of alchemy wasn't just a fantasy for the practitioner. It was a fantasy for the patron, too. And in the shadowy space between what was hoped for and what was possible, the charlatan found his perfect stage, leaving a trail of empty coffers, fuming beakers, and broken dreams in his wake. Let's push past the frauds and the royal intrigue and step into the heart of the matter, the laboratory itself. This is the inner sanctum, the engine room of the great work. Forget the clean, white, stainless steel vision of a modern chemistry. Lab. The alchemist's workshop is a place of organized chaos, a sensory overload that tells a story of tireless, often frustrating, experimentation. You push open a heavy wooden door, and the first thing that hits you is the smell, a potent cocktail of sharp mineral acids, the rotten egg stench of sulfur, smoldering charcoal, and a dozen unidentifiable herbal scents, all clinging to the damp. Stone walls. The room is dominated by the furnace. It is the soul of the laboratory, the alchemical altar. It's not just a simple fireplace. It's a specialized piece of equipment, often called an athanor, from the Arabic al-tanr. A well-built athanor was designed to maintain a steady, gentle heat for incredibly long periods, weeks, or even months at a time. This slow, constant cooking was believed to mimic the gentle heat within the womb of the earth, where metals were thought to grow and mature. You see the alchemist tending it with a devotion that is almost parental, carefully feeding it charcoal, adjusting the bellows to control the flow of air, his face illuminated by the soft orange glow from its vents. Getting the heat just right, the fire of the first degree, as they called it, was a crucial and difficult art. Your eyes adjust to the dim light, and you begin to take in the sheer clutter of equipment, most of it made of glass or earthenware. Glassblowing was the sister art of alchemy. The alchemists needed vessels that could withstand heat and corrosive substances, and that would allow them to observe the transformations within. On shelves and benches, you see a menagerie of strange glass shapes. There is the alembic, that elegant still you first saw in the House of Wisdom, used for distillation. Remember its role in purifying alcohol and creating powerful acids? Here it is, in constant use. Next to it is a retort, a simple, gourd-shaped flask with a long, bent neck pointing downwards, used for distilling dry materials. You see dozens of flasks, beakers, and receivers. But the most important vessel of all is the one sitting in the heart of the Athenor. It is the philosopher's egg, or the vas hermeticum, the hermetically sealed vessel. It was crucial that this vessel be perfectly sealed to prevent the spirit or volatile essence of the substance from escaping during the long cooking process. This is where we get the term hermetically sealed. So the next time you open a vacuum-sealed jar of coffee, you can thank the alchemists for the concept. Scattered across the workbenches are other essential tools: mortar and pestles of stone, bronze, and marble for grinding materials into fine powders; crucibles, small, hardy ceramic; pots designed to withstand the fiercest temperatures of the forge from melting metals. You see water baths, the bain-marie you encountered in ancient Alexandria, still being used for gentle heating. There are complex systems of filters made from felt or linen, and color-coded jars holding various chemicals, often labeled with cryptic astrological symbols rather than their common names. A mainstream historical fact is that many of the basic laboratory techniques we still use today were invented or perfected in these cluttered workshops. Processes like distillation for purification, sublimation for turning a solid directly into a gas, calcination, roasting a substance to drive off impurities, and crystallization were the alchemists' daily bread. They were the first true masters of chemical analysis, even if their theoretical framework was, to our eyes, completely wrong. They learned, through endless trial and error, what substances reacted with others, what dissolved in what, and how to separate complex mixtures into their constituent parts. Of course, the lab was also a place of immense danger. There were no safety goggles, no fume hoods, no concept of OSHA. Explosions were a constant risk. The great alchemist and early chemist Robert Boyle, whom you'll meet later, wrote about a colleague who was killed when a sealed vessel of heated mercury exploded, sending shards of glass into his skull. Poisoning was an even more insidious threat. Alchemists worked constantly with mercury, lead, arsenic, and antimony. They inhaled their toxic fumes and often handled them with their bare hands. The divine water they distilled might contain nitric or sulfuric acid, and a spill could cause a horrific burn. The madness attributed to many, an obsessive alchemist, may have been less a spiritual ailment and more a straightforward case of chronic heavy metal poisoning. As you look closer, you spot a quirky, less scientific item tucked in a corner: a human skull. It's a common feature in alchemical illustrations, a memento mori or a reminder of death. It served as a potent symbol. It reminded the alchemist of the fleeting nature of life and the urgency of the great work. It also represented the negredo stage, the death and putrefaction that was the necessary first step for any transformation. And perhaps it was also just a cool, edgy accessory for the lab. You can't deny it adds a certain dramatic flair. Historians still argue about the true nature of the alchemist's lab. Was it a proto-scientific space, the direct ancestor of the modern chemistry lab? Or was it more of a chapel, a private space? For meditation and ritual where the physical apparatus was secondary to the spiritual journey? The answer, as with so much in alchemy, is that it was both. It was a place of prayer and of practice, of theory and of trial and error. Every piece of equipment, from the humble crucible to the majestic Athenor, was both a practical tool and a philosophical symbol. As you stand in this cramped, smoky, and dangerous room, you are standing in a place where the physical and the metaphysical worlds met, bubbled, and sometimes exploded. You've explored the laboratory and seen the strange equipment, but to truly understand the alchemist's world, you need to learn their language. And it's not a language spoken with a tone. It's a language of symbols, a dense, cryptic, and often beautiful visual code designed to communicate vast concepts while simultaneously hiding them from the prying eyes of the vulgar or uninitiated. The alchemists believed their art was sacred and dangerous. In the wrong hands, the secret to the philosopher's stone could cause untold chaos, debasing economies and disrupting the divine order. So they cloaked their knowledge in a veil of eye, allegory and symbolism, ensuring that only those with the patience, intellect, and spiritual purity to decipher it could access the prize. You find yourself poring over a richly illustrated manuscript, a book like the famous Splendor Solis, or the Mutus Liber, Mute Book. The Mutus Liber is particularly fascinating. It's an alchemical manual told almost entirely through a series of 15 intricate engravings. There are no recipes, no written instructions. It's a purely visual guide to the great work, and if you don't know the language, it's utterly baffling. You see strange figures, a man and a woman, suns and moons, bizarre hybrid creatures, performing complex actions with the familiar laboratory equipment. Let's start decoding the basics. The 7 known metals of the ancient world were each linked to one of the 7 celestial bodies. Gold, perfect and incorruptible, was the sun. Silver, the next most perfect, was the moon. Mercury, the strange liquid metal that seemed to be both metal and spirit, was the planet Mercury. Copper, associated with the goddess of love, was Venus. Iron, the metal of war, was Mars. Tin was associated with the king of the gods Jupiter, and lead, the heavy, dull, base metal, was linked to the slow, ponderous god of time, Saturn. So when you see a text describing the marriage of the sun and the moon, it's not talking about an astronomical event. It's alchemical code for the combination of gold and silver, or more allegorically, the masculine and feminine principles within the work. Then you have the 4 classical elements you encountered back in Alexandria. Earth is represented by a downward-pointing triangle with a horizontal bar. Water is a simple downward-pointing triangle. Air is an upward-pointing triangle with a bar. And fire is a simple upward-pointing triangle. The trio prima of Paracelsus also have their own symbols. Sulfur, the fiery masculine principle, is often shown as a triangle of fire sitting atop the cross of matter. Mercury, the watery, feminine, spiritual principle, is represented by the familiar symbol with the crescent moon on top, the circle of the sun in the middle, and the cross of matter below. Salt, the principle of body and stability, is often a circle divided by a horizontal line. An alchemical recipe might not have words at all, but simply a string of these symbols, a kind of chemical equation for the initiated. But the symbolism goes much, much deeper. Animals play a huge role. You see the Ouroboros, the serpent eating its own tail. This is a powerful symbol of eternity, of the cyclical nature of the work, where the end is the beginning. It represents the idea that the prima materia is one thing that devours itself, separates itself, and recombines with itself to achieve perfection. You see a green lion devouring the sun. This is not a scene from a psychedelic fairy tale. It's a well-known alchemical code. The green lion often represents a powerful, corrosive acid, like sulfuric acid or aqua regia, and the sun is gold. So, the image depicts the process of dissolving gold in acid, a key step in many alchemical procedures. Colors are a language in themselves. As you know, the stages of the great work are marked by color changes. The black crow or raven symbolizes the nigredo, the initial stage of death and decay. The white swan represents the albedo, the purification. And the peacock, with its shimmering, multicolored tail, often represents an intermediate stage where a rainbow of colors appears in the flask, a sign of progress before the final reddening. The rubedo, the final success, is often symbolized by a phoenix rising from the flames, or by a red king triumphant and reborn. One of the most mainstream historical examples of this deep allegorical style is the work attributed to Basil Valentine, a supposed 15th century Benedictine monk. His book, The 12 Keys of Basil Valentine, describes the alchemical process in 12 incredibly dense, allegorical passages, each accompanied by a symbolic woodcut. They are filled with kings, queens, wolves, and dragons, all acting out a complex chemical drama. For centuries, alchemists tried to physically replicate the bizarre steps described in these keys. Modern analysis, however, suggests that Basil Valentine probably never existed, and the works were likely written by a 16th century German salt manufacturer, a detail that feels wonderfully mundane. Even the architecture of the lab can be symbolic. You notice a quirky fringe idea depicted in some alchemical illustrations: the cosmic furnace. Some alchemists built their athanors to be microcosms of the universe, with different chambers corresponding to different planetary spheres or elemental realms. The work wasn't just happening in the lab. The lab was the work, a miniature replica of the cosmos where the alchemist could play God on a small scale. Historians still argue about the primary function of this symbolic language. Was it truly just to hide secrets, a form of intellectual property protection in an age before patents? Or was its purpose more psychological? Did this rich, dreamlike imagery serve to activate the alchemist's subconscious, to put them in a meditative, receptive state of mind necessary for the spiritual transformation that was supposed to accompany the physical one? It's likely both. The symbols operated on multiple levels at once. They were a practical shorthand for chemical substances, a security measure to keep out the unworthy, and a powerful meditative tool to guide the alchemist on their parallel journey of inner purification. Learning to read these images is to see the world as the alchemist saw it, a place where a metal was also a planet, a chemical reaction was also a spiritual drama, and every substance in their laboratory was a word in the divine language of God. The 17th century dawns, and the intellectual landscape of Europe is crackling with a new kind of energy. The old ways of thinking, based on ancient authority and divine revelation, are being challenged by a powerful new idea: radical skepticism. This is the age of the scientific revolution. A new breed of thinker, now calling themselves natural philosophers, insists that knowledge must be built on a foundation of empirical evidence, rigorous experimentation, and mathematical proof. And in this new, unforgiving intellectual climate, alchemy, with its secret languages and its soul journeys, is about to face its greatest trial by fire. Your journey takes you to England, a hub of this new scientific ferment. You find yourself in the presence of Robert Boyle, an Irish aristocrat, a brilliant experimentalist, and a man who will drive a wedge deep into the heart of alchemy, beginning the process of separating it into two distinct fields: mystical, spiritual, alchemy on one side, and practical empirical chemistry on the other. Boyle is, in many ways, an alchemist himself. He was a devoutly religious man who spent a great deal of his time and fortune trying to achieve transmutation. He believed in the philosopher's stone and even successfully lobbied the English Parliament to repeal an old law against alchemical gold-making. He was fascinated by the potential of the art, But he was also a man of his time, deeply frustrated by the vagueness, secrecy, and what he saw as the deliberate obscurantism of the alchemical tradition. He wanted clarity. He wanted reproducible results. He wanted a science dot in 1661. You are present for the publication of his masterpiece, The Skeptical Chemist. The book is a landmark. It's written as a dialogue, a popular format at the time, and it launches a devastating attack on the foundational theories of alchemy that you've come to know so well. Boyle systematically dismantles Aristotle's four elements: earth, air, fire, water, and exterior prima of Paracelsus, salt, sulfur, mercury. He does this not through philosophical argument, but through experimental evidence. You watch him in his laboratory, which is a far cry from the cluttered, symbolic workshop of the old alchemists. It is a space for measurement and precision. He argues that fire, for instance, isn't a fundamental element that can be added or removed from a substance. When you burn wood, he demonstrates, it doesn't simply break down into its constituent elements of fire, air, and earth. It transforms into smoke, ash, and other substances. And the process is far more complex than the old theories allowed. He shows through careful experiments that these so-called elements and principles cannot be isolated from metals. No one, he points out, has ever managed to extract philosophical mercury or sulfur from gold. The alchemists claim they are there, but they can offer no empirical proof dot in their place. Boyle proposes a new mechanical, corpuscularian philosophy. He suggests that all matter is composed of tiny, solid particles, corpuscles of various shapes and sizes. The properties of a substance are not determined by its balance of mystical principles, but by the arrangement and motion of these fundamental particles. A chemical reaction, therefore, is simply a rearrangement of these particles into new structures. This is a powerful revolutionary idea. It strips away the allegory and the mysticism and offers a purely mechanical explanation for chemical changes. This corpuscularian view is the direct forerunner of our modern atomic theory dot in The Skeptical Chemist. Boyle lays down a new definition of a chemical element. It is a substance that cannot be broken down into simpler substances by chemical means. This definition, a cornerstone of modern chemistry, is a direct challenge to the alchemical worldview. If gold is an element in its own right, then it cannot be a compound of mercury and sulfur, and the entire theoretical basis for transmutation comes crashing down. This new skeptical chemistry demands a new language. Boyle rails against the symbolic, secretive language you just learned to decode. He insists on clarity and openness. He argues that recipes and experiments should be described in plain, simple language so that any other experimenter can replicate them. This is the birth of the modern scientific paper. Remember the mutus liber, the mute book that told its secrets only through images? Boyle is demanding the exact opposite. A loud book, one that shouts its methods from the rooftops for all to test and verify. A mainstream historical fact is that Boyle is often credited as the first to describe the inverse relationship between the pressure and volume of a gas, which became known as Boyle's law, a foundational principle of physics and chemistry. Yet, even as he lays the groundwork for modern chemistry, Boyle's own life is full of alchemical quirks. A fascinating fringe tidbit is his obsession with a strange substance he called red earth. He received a recipe for it from a mysterious source and believed it was a key ingredient, perhaps the prima materia itself, for creating the philosopher's stone. He spent years performing experiments on this red earth, hoping it would lead to the great work, a quest he detailed in his private, coded diaries. Historians still argue about how to classify Robert Boyle. Was he the first chemist or the last alchemist? This question gets to the heart of the 17th century transition. He was both. He was a man who used the new rigorous methods of empirical science to pursue the old mystical goals of alchemy. He represents a fundamental split in the path of knowledge. He demonstrates that the methods of alchemy, distillation, analysis, experimentation, could be separated from its grand metaphysical goals. The methods would go on to become the science of chemistry, focused on the practical, the measurable, and the provable. The goals, the quest for ultimate wisdom, spiritual transformation, and a unified theory of everything, would retreat further into the realms of mysticism and esoteric philosophy. The great work was being cleaved in two. Just as Robert Boyle is laying the public foundations for a new, skeptical chemistry, the greatest scientific mind of the age is in secret, delving deeper into the mystical heart of alchemy than almost anyone before him. You now enter the private, hidden world of a man who represents the pinnacle of the scientific revolution, a figure whose public image was one of cool, mechanical rationality, but whose private soul was that of a fervent alchemist. That man is Sir Isaac Newton, to the outside world. Newton is the genius who formulated the laws of motion and universal gravitation, the man who invented calculus, and the scientist who split white light into its constituent colors with a prism. You see him as his public persona, the august president of the Royal Society, the master of the Royal Mint, a celebrated national hero. He is the very embodiment of the new science, a man who seemed to have deciphered the clockwork machinery of the universe with pure logic and mathematics. His great work, the Principia Mathematica, is a monument to this mechanical view of the cosmos. But now you gain access to his private chambers, to the laboratory he built behind his rooms at Trinity College, Cambridge. He kept the door perpetually locked and the fire in his Athanor burning for weeks on end. Here, another Newton emerges, one that would have shocked his rationalist admirers. You see stacks of manuscripts, not on physics or mathematics, but on alchemy. He is one of a handful of people in the world who can decode the cryptic symbols and allegories you've studied. He is obsessed with figures like Basil Valentine and the mysterious American alchemist George Starkey, who wrote under the name Irenaeus. Philauthus, Newton didn't just read about alchemy. He practiced it with a feverish intensity. He spent countless hours over his furnace, performing the dangerous and meticulous operations you've witnessed before. He wasn't just a casual hobbyist. He was a true adept. A mainstream historical fact is that upon his death, a massive collection of his papers was found, and of the roughly 10 million words he wrote in his lifetime, over 1 million of them, full 10%, were on the subject of alchemy. This wasn't a minor sideline. It was a core part of his life's work. For decades, this aspect of Newton's life was a source of embarrassment to his biographers, who often downplayed it or dismissed it as a senile fancy. It was only in the 20th century when the economist John Maynard Keynes bought a large collection of these alchemical papers that the world began to reckon with the other Newton. Keynes famously declared, "Newton was not the first of the age of reason. He was the last of the magicians." Why was this giant of the scientific revolution so deeply invested in what Boyle was beginning to frame as an obsolete pseudoscience? For Newton, there was no contradiction. He believed that God had created the universe according to a unified, divine plan. The physical laws he described in his Principia were one part of that plan, the exoteric or outer-facing knowledge. Alchemy, he believed, was the key to the esoteric inner knowledge. It was the secret of how God had infused matter with active, living principles. The gravity that held the planets in their orbits was, in his mind, likely related to the active principles that allowed metals to be transmuted. He was looking for a grand unified theory of everything, and he believed the secrets lay not just in mathematics, but in the dusty, allegorical scrolls of the alchemists. You watch him at work, trying to replicate a recipe for a substance he called Sophic mercury. He believed this was not common mercury, but a special animated form of it that could dissolve gold and act as the agent of transmutation. He corresponds in secret with other adepts, including Robert Boyle and the philosopher John Locke, sharing coded notes on their experiments. They were part of a hidden fraternity, a secret college of alchemists working at the highest levels of the scientific establishment. In his alchemical notes, you find a truly quirky fringe tidbit that reveals the depth of his mystical thinking. Newton became obsessed with the idea of a vegetable principle in metals. He didn't believe metals were dead, inert things. He believed they grew and matured within the earth, like plants. He spent an enormous amount of time trying to create a metallic tree by growing a crystalline structure of silver from a solution, a phenomenon known as the Tree of Diana. For him, this wasn't just a neat chemical trick. It was proof that metals possessed a hidden, vital, vegetative life force. It was a window into the secret soul of matter. Historians still argue about the precise relationship between Newton's alchemy and his science. Did his alchemical work influence his scientific discoveries, or were they two entirely separate pursuits? Some scholars suggest that his concept of action at a distance, the gravitational force that acts between two bodies without any physical connection, was easier for him to accept because he was already steeped in the alchemical idea of sympathies and hidden forces connecting all things. His concept of light being made of particles or corpuscles also echoes the corpuscularian theories you saw developing in Boyle's work, which itself grew out of alchemical thought. Was he trying to find the philosopher's stone to make gold? Probably not. For Newton, transmutation was the ultimate proof of his unified theory. If he could change lead into gold, he would have demonstrated his understanding of the deepest, most secret laws of God's creation. The image of Newton, solitary genius, hunched over his furnace, risking mercury poisoning in a secret quest for God's hidden blueprint, is a powerful one. It shows that the dawn of the age of reason was not a simple, clean break from the past. The old world of magic, mystery, and alchemy didn't just vanish. It flowed directly into the new world of science, often hidden in the notebooks and secret laboratories of its most celebrated pioneers. The search for the philosopher's stone hadn't ended. It had simply gone underground, pursued by the most brilliant mind of the age. While figures like Newton were secretly chasing the grand, unified theory of alchemy, the more practical, less glamorous side of the art was yielding spectacular and world-changing results. The relentless experimentation of thousands of alchemists, over centuries, even when aimed at a fantastical goal, had created a vast repository of practical knowledge and a host of new powerful substances. Now, as the 18th century progresses, you see this legacy bearing fruit, not in the form of the philosopher's stone, but in discoveries that will pave the way for the Industrial Revolution and modern material science. The alchemists may have been aiming for heaven, but they hit the world. You are back in a laboratory, but the atmosphere has changed again. The focus is less on the single great work and more on specific targeted investigations. One of the most direct lines of inheritance from alchemy is in the field of metallurgy. For centuries, alchemists had been heating, melting, and mixing metals, documenting their properties with meticulous care. This hands-on knowledge was invaluable. You see it being applied by artisans and early industrialists. They are using alchemical methods to improve the quality of steel for swords and armor, to perfect the casting of bronze for cannons and statues, and to create new alloys for everything from coins to scientific instruments. The alchemist's obsession with purification led directly to techniques for assaying and refining precious metals. Remember Newton's role as master of the royal mint? That wasn't a ceremonial position. He was responsible for the quality of the nation's currency, and he used his deep chemical knowledge to fight counterfeiters and improve the purity of English coinage. The same techniques an alchemist used to test a sample for gold were now being used to ensure economic stability. The medical legacy of Paracelsus continues to expand. The iatrochemists, or chemical physicians, are creating a whole new pharmacopoeia. They are isolating active ingredients, creating mineral-based medicines, and, through their mastery of distillation, producing purer forms of alcohol and acids for use as antiseptics and reagents. Remember the laudanum, the tincture of opium, Paracelsus popularized? It has now become the most effective painkiller available, a staple in every doctor's bag. The alchemists' search for the universal panacea failed, but in the process, they accidentally created hundreds of specific ones. But perhaps the most dramatic legacy of alchemy is the discovery of entirely new elements. The alchemists had worked with the 7 metals of antiquity, plus a few other substances like sulfur, mercury, and arsenic. But their relentless experimentation, mixing, heating, and analyzing everything they could get their hands on occasionally led them to stumble upon something completely new. You find yourself in Hamburg in 1669 in the laboratory of Hennig Brand. You'll remember him as the man who took the dirty path of alchemy seriously. He is searching for the philosopher's stone, and he has a theory that it might be found in the vital fluid of the human body. Urine. You watch his frankly disgusting experiment unfold. He gathers a colossal amount of urine, some 1,500 gallons, and allows it to putrefy. Then he boils it down to a thick syrup, heats this residue to a very high temperature in his retort, and collects the vapor that comes off underwater. As the process finishes and the laboratory darkens, he sees something incredible. The substance at the bottom of his flask is glowing with a faint, ethereal green light. It burns with a cold fire. Brand is astounded. He believes he has captured the spirit of the world, the vital essence he was looking for. He has not found the philosopher's stone, but he has become the first person in history to discover a new element that was not known to the ancients. He calls it phosphorus, from the Greek for light-bearer. This is a monumental, if accidental, achievement. Phosphorus would go on to be crucial in agriculture, as fertilizer, and, less peacefully, in the creation of matches and incendiary weapons. Discovery is a perfect metaphor for the alchemical legacy. In searching for a mythical, all-powerful substance, Brand found a real, tangible one with its own unique and powerful properties. A similar story, and a mainstream historical fact, is the discovery of porcelain in Europe. For centuries, Europeans had coveted the beautiful, translucent porcelain imported from China, but had no idea how to make it. It was an alchemist, Johann Friedrich Packer, working under the patronage and effective imprisonment of Augustus the Strong, Elector of Saxony, who finally cracked the secret in 1708. He had been hired to make gold, and like so many others, he failed. But in his desperate experiments, mixing different kinds of clay and minerals and firing them at extreme temperatures, he stumbled upon the correct formula for true hard-paste porcelain. This white gold, as it became known, created a massive industry at Meissen and was, in its own way, as valuable to his patron as the real thing. You also encounter a quirky, lesser-known discovery, the first synthetic pigment of the modern era, Prussian blue. In Berlin around 1706, a paintmaker named Johann Jacob Diesbach was trying to create a red pigment. He was using a recipe that involved potash, iron sulfate, and cochineal. One day, his batch of potash was contaminated. It had been supplied by, guess who? An alchemist, Johann Conrad Dippel, who had been using it in his experiments, which involved distilling animal blood and bones to create a universal medicine he called Dippel's oil. This contaminated potash reacted with the iron sulfate in an unexpected way, producing not red, but a deep, vibrant, and stable blue pigment. It was a complete accident, a byproduct of a bizarre alchemical experiment. Prussian blue was cheap to make and quickly replaced expensive traditional pigments like ultramarine, changing the artist's palette forever. Historians still argue about when exactly alchemy ended and chemistry began. But as you witness these discoveries, you realize there was no clean break. It was a slow transformation. The grand overarching quest for the stone faded, but the tools, techniques, and substances it produced became the building blocks of a new world. The alchemists' obsessive fuming over their beakers didn't give them immortality, but it gave us new materials, new medicines, and new elements, fundamentally changing science and history in ways they could never have predicted. The furnace fires of the alchemists have long gone out. The rise of modern chemistry in the 18th and 19th centuries, with Lavoisier's precise measurements and Dalton's atomic theory, seems to have banished alchemy to the dusty attic of history, a relic of a superstitious and unenlightened past. The quest for transmutation was deemed impossible, the language of symbols dismissed as unscientific nonsense. And there the story might have ended, with alchemy as a failed science, a curious dead end on the road to modernity. But in the early 20th century, in a place far from any laboratory, the ghost of alchemy found a new and unexpected home. In the consulting room of the psychoanalyst, your journey now takes a sharp, inward turn. You are in Zurich, Switzerland, in the quiet, book-lined study of a man who is exploring a different kind of inner world, the vast, uncharted territory of the human psyche. His name is Carl Gustav Jung. A former disciple of Sigmund Freud, Jung has broken away to develop his own deeply complex theories of the mind. He is fascinated by the universal symbols, myths, and religious stories that appear across all human cultures, and he believes they spring from a collective unconscious, a shared repository of ancestral memories and archetypes. One day, a friend sends him a translation of an ancient Chinese alchemical text, The Secret of the Golden Flower. Jung is electrified. As he reads the cryptic text, with its talk of circulation, distillation, and the creation of a diamond body, he doesn't see a failed chemical recipe. He sees a stunningly accurate map of the process of psychological transformation that he has been observing in his patients. He realizes that the alchemists were not just projecting their hopes onto metals. They were projecting their own unconscious psychological processes. This insight launches Jung on a decades-long obsession. You see him scouring libraries for obscure alchemical manuscripts, the same texts by Zosimos, Basil Valentine, and Paracelsus that you've encountered on your journey. He amasses one of the finest collections of alchemical books in the world. He learns to decode their bizarre imagery, but he interprets it in a completely new way. The alchemical laboratory, he argues, was not just a workshop. It was a sanctuary for the mind. The alchemist, working in solitude, was able to witness the projections of his own inner drama playing out in the bubbling flasks and changing colors. Of his experiments, Jung reframes the entire great work as a powerful metaphor for what he calls individuation. This is the lifelong process of becoming a whole, integrated, and authentic self. It is the journey of reconciling the opposing forces within the psyche, the conscious and the unconscious, the masculine, animus, and the feminine, anima, persona, the social mask we wear, and the shadow, the hidden, repressed parts of ourselves. You can see the direct parallels. Remember the prima materia, that rejected, chaotic, common substance that was the starting point of the work? For Jung, this is the undifferentiated, unconscious psyche of an ordinary person. The nigredo, the blackening, the stage of death and decay. This, Jung says, is the painful but necessary encounter with the shadow self. It's a period of depression, confusion, and despair that often marks the beginning of a profound psychological journey, where one's old identity dissolves. It's the moment you have to confront the parts of yourself you'd rather ignore. The albedo, the whitening, or washing is the next stage. This represents the purification of the soul, the process of untangling the true self from the shadow and the persona. It involves the integration of the anima or animus, the feminine soul image in a man, or the masculine soul image in a woman. This is symbolized in the alchemical texts by the hieroglyphs, or sacred marriage of the red king Sol and the white queen Luna. This isn't about combining chemicals. It's about integrating the opposing masculine and feminine energies within a single personality to create a new level of awareness. Finally, the rubedo, the reddening, the creation of the philosopher's stone. For Jung, this represents the achievement of individuation. The stone, which unites all opposites, is a symbol for the integrated self, a new psychic center that transcends the ego. The person who achieves this state is not perfect in a simplistic sense, but they are whole, balanced, and conscious of their own true nature. They have, in a psychological sense, turned the lead of their unconscious, unexamined life into the gold of a fully realized self. A quirky but central part of Jung's interpretation is his fascination with the figure of Mercurius. In alchemy, as you know, mercury was a paradoxical substance. It was a metal, but also a liquid, a spirit, but also a body. It was often depicted as a trickster, a divine psychopomp who could unite the realms of heaven and earth. For Jung, Mercurius became the perfect symbol for the collective unconscious, itself elusive, transformative, and dangerously powerful. He is the guide on the inner journey. A mainstream historical fact is that Jung published his extensive research on this topic in several dense volumes, most notably Psychology and Alchemy and the massive Mysterium Conjunctionis. These works were met with bewilderment by many in the scientific and psychoanalytic communities, who saw it as a bizarre detour into mysticism. But for others, it was a revolutionary act of intellectual archaeology, rescuing alchemy from the alchemy, scrap heap of pseudoscience, and revealing it as a profound and sophisticated tradition of European psychology, a precursor to his own work. Historians and psychologists still argue about the validity of Jung's interpretation. Was he genuinely rediscovering the original psychological intent of the alchemists? Or was he simply a brilliant and creative thinker using their rich symbolic language as a convenient scaffold on which to build his own complex theories? Did the alchemists know they were doing psychology? Probably not in our modern sense. But Jung would argue that they were experiencing these psychological realities directly in describing them in the only symbolic language available to them, the language of matter. In Jung's hands, the legacy of the alchemists was transmuted one last time. Their search for immortality was reimagined as the search for wholeness. Their fuming beakers turned into metaphors for the bubbling passions of the human heart, and their great work became the timeless universal quest to truly know thyself. The alchemist's laboratory has been dismantled, its cryptic symbols reinterpreted as psychological maps, its practical techniques absorbed into the vast enterprise of modern science. It would be easy to close the book here, to see alchemy as a finished story, a curious ancestor we can safely patronize. But as you stand in the bright, humming, hyper-specialized world of the 21st century, you begin to see that the alchemist's ghost doesn't just haunt the psychoanalyst's couch. It walks the gleaming corridors of our most advanced research facilities. The alchemist's core ambitions, their unquenchable thirst for transformation, longevity, and the mastery of matter, were not extinguished. They have simply been transmuted, reappearing in new forms, pursued with tools and a level of funding the likes of John D. or Paracelsus could only have dreamed of. The most literal echo of the alchemical quest is found in the heart of the atom. For centuries, transmutation was the impossible dream. Robert Boyle and the chemists who followed him declared elements to be fundamental and immutable. And they were right by chemical means. But in the 20th century, physicists unlocked a new, far more powerful force. You find yourself at the control panel of a particle accelerator, a colossal ring of magnets and vacuum chambers. Here, scientists are doing what the alchemists could only imagine. They are changing one element into another. In 1919, Ernest Rutherford first turned nitrogen into oxygen by bombarding it with alpha particles. This was the first successful artificial transmutation. A more famous historical fact is that in 1980, scientists at the Lawrence Berkeley Laboratory, using a particle accelerator, successfully transmuted a tiny amount of bismuth into gold. The cost of the process was, of course, astronomical, orders of magnitude more than the value of the gold produced. They had achieved the alchemists' goal, but in doing so, they proved why it was such an economically foolish idea in the first place. But the real legacy isn't about making gold. It's about the deeper dream, the conquest of death. The search for the elixir of life is alive and well. It has just changed its name. Today, it's called biotechnology, genetic engineering, and regenerative medicine. You move from the particle accelerator to a sterile white biotechnology lab. Here, scientists are not mixing potions. They are editing the code of life itself. They are using tools like CRISPR to snip out faulty genes that cause hereditary diseases. They are researching telomeres, the protective caps on our chromosomes that shorten as we age, hoping to find a way to halt or even reverse the aging process at a cellular level. They are growing new organs from stem cells in petri dishes, pursuing a future where a failing heart or liver can be replaced not with a donor's, but with a perfect, lab-grown copy of your own. Is this not the modern echo of the panacea, the universal cure that the alchemists sought in their tinctures and stones? The promise is the same, a life free from disease, a life extended far beyond its natural span. The alchemists' desire to create artificial life, their strange dream of the homunculus or tequin, also finds its modern counterpart. You see it in the field of artificial intelligence and robotics. Researchers are working to create not a miniature man in a jar, but a conscious mind in a silicon chip. They speak of the singularity, a hypothetical point where machine intelligence surpasses human intelligence, potentially merging with it to create a new form of post-human existence. This ambition to create an intelligence, a life, from non-living matter is a direct descendant of the alchemical worldview that saw all matter as possessing a latent spark of life, just waiting for the right process to awaken it. One of the quirkiest modern parallels can be found in the world of material science. The alchemists sought to perfect matter, to turn dull lead into shining gold. Today, material scientists are the new masters of transformation. They are creating substances that nature never imagined, carbon nanotubes 100 times stronger than steel, shape memory alloys that remember their original form, and superconductors that carry electricity with zero resistance. They are, in essence, modern-day metallurgists, manipulating the qualities of matter not with sulfur and mercury, but with precise atomic arrangements and quantum mechanical principles, creating a new world of philosophical gold with properties far more magical than simple incorruptibility. Historians and philosophers of science still argue about the true legacy of alchemy. Was it just a series of fortunate accidents on the road to real science, or does its holistic, interconnected worldview still hold some wisdom for us today? In an age of hyper-specialization, where a biologist may not understand the work of a physicist, the alchemical ideal of a unified knowledge, a science that embraces the physical, the psychological, and the spiritual seems both impossibly naive and strangely appealing. The alchemists failed. They never found the stone. They never brewed the elixir. They never made a fortune, turning lead into gold. But their spectacular centuries-long failure was one of the most productive in human history. Their legacy is not the gold they sought, but the questions they asked and the relentless, obsessive spirit in which they pursued them. They taught us to believe in the possibility of radical transformation, to look for the secrets of the universe in the most humble of substances, and to pursue knowledge with a passion that borders on madness. That unquenchable human thirst, the refusal to accept the world as it is, and the burning desire to remake it and ourselves into something better, something more perfect, that is the alchemist's true and immortal legacy. The fires in the Athanor have long since been extinguished. The alembics and retorts now sit as curiosities in museum cabinets, and the cryptic symbols have faded from the pages of their ancient, crumbling books. Yet the essential quest that drove them forward through long, smoky nights continues to pulse at the very heart of our own modern world, a quiet testament to the enduring power of a dream. As you drift now from these thoughts of particle accelerators and genetic codes, you can allow the imagery to soften, to fade back into the simpler, flickering light of that first alchemical furnace. The search for knowledge, the hope for a longer, healthier life, and the deep-seated human desire to find meaning and connection in the fabric of the cosmos. These are the timeless currents that flow beneath the great river of history. A legacy, left not of gold, but of an unending and beautiful human ambition. Let that quiet, persistent flame be a comforting glow as you ease now, deeper and deeper, into a peaceful and well-deserved rest, allowing the story to dissolve into the silent, transformative alchemy of your own dreams.